On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. This is episode 41, created on February 8th, 2023. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota and Neil on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
Hello, gentlemen. Tonight, I'm going with a different flavor. I'm going with a KBS, Kentucky Breakfast Stout, but this one is a cinnamon vanilla cocoa.
And I am going with one of the two teams in the Super Bowl. I'm a Victory Brewing Hop Hazer Victory from outside of Philadelphia in Downingtown, Pennsylvania.
All right, and I'm representing a city that is not represented in the Super Bowl. I've got a Moscow Mule as my beverage for this evening. All right, you can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast, Green Bay Chat. And the audio is available on Spotify. Just search for, you guessed it, Green Bay Chat. Well, what are we talking about tonight? Just like everybody else, what is on our mind? It is Super Bowl 57. We will take a look at the big game coming up this weekend. We have a Packer player, or just Packer of the past, if you will. We do have a guest this week, just like we had a guest last week from Kansas City. We've got a Philly guest joining us tonight. We'll also have our history report before we wrap things up. But you guys, it is this Sunday, live from State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. Kickoff is scheduled for 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, Neil, 6:30 on your end of the world. Both of these teams, the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles, were 14-3 in the regular season. They were both the number one seeds coming out of their respective conferences. They both get two playoff wins coming into this game. Philly is going to be the home team. They are wearing their green jerseys. Kansas City, designated as the away team, they will be wearing white. That's the important stuff. Neil, you've got the brass tacks, so tell us, what else do we need to know about these two teams?
So broadly, these are two pretty well-matched teams overall. By weighted DVOA, they're third and fifth, Kansas City with the better ranking. The differences come in the offense and the defense. Specifically, Kansas City with the number one ranked offense by DVOA, the Eagles only third, and there's a 25% versus 15% difference. So a pretty big difference between that 1 and 3. There's also a big difference on the defensive side. The Eagles sixth, whereas Kansas City is 17th by DVOA. And you see this come up in a number of different situations, but we think about the strengths. You'd expect a Patrick Mahomes quarterback team to be really good at the pass. Indeed, they were number one in passing yards, but only 20th in rushing yards, very typical for an Andy Reid type team, but first overall in total yards, first in points. Eagles, as far as their offense is concerned, 9th in passing yards, 5th in rushing yards, 3rd in total yards. So a lot of balance as far as those offensive numbers are concerned for Philadelphia. You get to the other side of the line, and the Eagles have the number one passing defense, allowing only 180 passing yards per game. In contrast, Kansas City is 18th in passing defense. Philadelphia, however, is 17th in rushing defense in the NFL this year, allowing 122 yards per game. The Kansas City Chiefs 8th in their rushing defense. So you look at this strength versus strength. The defense is not as strong for Kansas City, but they are better against the run than they are against the pass. And then as far as total points on defense, Eagles 8th, Kansas City 14th. One big difference is turnovers. The giveaway takeaway ratio for the Eagles is 3rd in the NFL at +8, whereas Kansas City is -3, tied for 22nd, with the caveat that they have had 2 or more takeaways in the last 4 games. So it's possible that they are turning it around. What you really notice when you look at the statistical differences between these teams is just how big a gap there is as far as the quarterbacking is concerned. Not based on completion percentage. Hurts and Mahomes are both 67%. But on the year, Jalen Hurts had 3,700 passing yards and 22 touchdowns, whereas Patrick Mahomes had 5,250 passing yards and 41 touchdowns on the year. So quite a big difference. Looking at Hurts versus Mahomes, 1 fourth quarter comeback for Hurts versus 4 for Patrick Mahomes. Just at a fundamental level, you're getting 1,500 more yards this season from Patrick Mahomes than you get from Jalen Hurts passing the ball. The difference, however, is running the ball. And obviously they've got Miles Sanders at 1,269 yards, 11 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts, 760 yards, 13 touchdowns regular season. And the other thing that I would say is, as far as a difference is concerned, is that, well, Kansas City has Travis Kelce, the best tight end in football, 1,338 yards, 110 receptions, 12 touchdowns. Their wide receivers are substantially below that level of Travis Kelce. And that's one big area where Philadelphia has an advantage. They specifically have two receivers with over 1,200 or 1,500 yards in receptions on the year, with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, and then a very good tight end in Dallas Goedert, 706 yards, 3 touchdowns. The best wide receiver for Kansas City, Juju Smith-Schuster, which it sounds like he is going to be able to play, only 933 yards. After that, you get down to MVS at only 687 yards. And yes, MVS took a step up, but there is definitely a gap, even without injuries, between the Kansas City wide receiver core and the Philadelphia wide receiver core. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are just better than the wide receivers that Kansas City has.
I
Wow.
can't disagree with anything you said. And
Yeah.
the one thing that I probably, you want to keep coming back to is how defense wins championships. And I think that defense is pretty strong for Philadelphia. Darius Slay at corner has been playing very strong. I'm glad he's not in Detroit anymore, where we have to see him twice a year. And Ndamukong Suh showed up in Philadelphia this year, and he may get some playing time. We don't know, but another guy, I think Fletcher Cox is one of those guys who I feel like he's been there forever. And just when you think that he, isn't going to be a factor, he just pounds through the line and makes a play. Could be surprising there. But just little things I think that defense does. Neil, you also touched on the Eagles offense. Yeah, I think that the receiver numbers are great. And we think, though, of Jalen Hurts, we tend to think of him as a running quarterback, though, which is kind of interesting. Even when he was out, Gardner Minshew didn't do terrible. So they do have him there if they need, if Hurts gets injured. But yeah, it's a good, well-rounded team in Philadelphia. Right now, they are actually favored, at least on the line that I'm looking at. This has been pretty much a pick'em game over the last week, depending on which odds makers you use. And I've seen anywhere from -2.5 to Kansas City to -2.5 Philadelphia. Right now, the one I'm looking at, Philadelphia favored by just 1.5. The over/under set at 51 points.
With the statistics, that's all fine and good, rushing, passing, but who's got the bigger chip on their shoulder? So you get, I don't know, because I think Kansas City's coming into this maybe feeling, I'll say disrespected, because how can they possibly be feeling disrespected? Like you said, they've got the best tight end in Travis Kelce, but I think Philly comes in maybe with a little bit bigger chip on their shoulder. I know that's, Philly in general has a big chip on their shoulder, right? I mean, that's who they are. But in terms of just with, from the coach, from, lots, some doubters, and I just, they're kind of playing like they've got the bigger chip. Also balance. And I think we've talked about this before too, that Philly has better balance, that they're going to run the ball. They're going to run the ball. They're going to run it down your throat. But, oh, by the way, we've got really good receivers, and they're very capable, obviously, passing as well. So Kansas City's a little more one-dimensional, perhaps, with Kelce, and you never know what Patrick Mahomes is going to do. Presumably reasonably healthy, at least on that ankle. Obviously, he'll be out there. But like I said, there's a big fall off in wide receivers, and certainly the running game is really nothing to write home about at all. So I'm leaning towards Philadelphia just simply because they seem like the better, more well-rounded, balanced team, and a little bit of chip on their shoulder as well. So, Neil, I know that doesn't bode well for you necessarily based on your geographic location, but we'll see. What other thoughts do you gentlemen have?
So talking about that balance, there was one thing that came out of the statistics for both teams in looking at what they were able to do with the running back. So we talked about Miles Sanders with all of his rushing yards. He only actually had 20 receptions on the year for 78 yards. So Miles Sanders is out there. He is out there to run and run only. And in the other direction on Kansas City, Isaiah Pacheco had the same basic situation, 170 rushes, 830 yards. It wasn't actually as bad as we might fear for an Andy Reid team, but he only had 13 receptions for 130 yards. And so you see those running backs out there, and that's telling you a lot of what they're probably going to do, or especially what they're not going to be doing in the game. And predictability is certainly always a concern from an Andy Reid team. He loves changing things up, but there's an overall predictability. And I will talk more about that specific element later. One other theme of this podcast has been the ass hats. And is there an ass hat difference between these teams? So I will say overall,
you were reading my mind, Neil. I was actually just thinking of like, we haven't talked about the ass hats yet. Enlighten us.
So overall, by DVOA, both special teams are dead on average, 13th and 19th overall special teams ranking. And you look at the kickers, Jake Elliott for Philadelphia, 20 of 23 field goals, along of 56, 51 of 53 and extra points. So somebody is solidly competent. Harrison Butker, 18 of 24 field goals. He did have a little swooning stretch in the middle. He also missed a few games because of injury, however. But Butker did have a long of 62 yards this year and 38 of 41 of extra points. So I think we're going to get basic competence as far as both teams. And of course, the nature of football is that random things happen. And if something random happens, of course, that could turn the game. But I don't see anything glaring as far as a difference between those two teams on the ASAT level.
The X factor that I think we want to also look at is maybe recent history and then head coaches, and particularly in Andy Reid. Andy Reid has a resume that is one of the best in the history of the NFL. Nick Sirianni is a guy who just became a head coach last year.
Second year.
You know, he's a guy who's worked his way around. You know, he's been a quarterbacks coach, receivers coach. He was in the Kansas City, offices 10, 12 years ago. But Andy Reid, right? Twice he's been a Super Bowl champion, once here in Green Bay, and again as a head coach in just a few years ago in 54. He's been a coach of the year in 2002. And just so many things about him that you can say. And we talk about this being the Andy Reid Bowl, right? He had great success in Philadelphia, went over to Kansas City and did the same thing. But as Neil put it last week, Andy Reid can Andy Reid himself out of the game as well, just as easily. But for, I think, all the mistakes and all the kind of things that make you facepalm, he's had just as much success, if not greater success, on the field. And that's why he's been around, working his way up, and then as a head coach for the last 24 years as well.
Well, just looking at his total number of postseason wins, he's actually second all-time among coaches for postseason wins. Teams that Andy Reid has coached have had 69 fourth quarter comebacks and game-winning drives. Also a really incredibly high number as far as what he allows or how he sets up his team in order to succeed. And I think it's that preparation before that Andy Reid does so well. And yes, he will have brain farts during the game. He'll forget it that he can run the ball, but that preparation that he engages in beforehand is the difference. And that's what's made him so successful a coach for so long. Talking about those X factors, there actually are 3 Philadelphia Eagles who actually played with Andy Reid back in Philadelphia: Jason Kelce, Fletcher Cox, and Brandon Graham. They're all holdovers from the Andy Reid era in Philadelphia. And so, there's definitely connections as far as both sides are concerned. One other note specifically about Jason Kelce. So prior to this year, Jason Kelce's old guy at this point, thought about hanging up the cleats, and Nick Sirianni shipped him 2 cases of beer in the offseason to try to convince him to come back. So
that's a Lombardi
that Kelce
move right
family.
There. That's one of those stories you hear from who Lombardi was trying to keep around in Green Bay, right?
Send him some beer. But I think that's, based on what I've been reading, and we'll, see if we can get more detail from our Philly guests, but that's kind of who Nick Sirianni is, right? He's just kind of a beer drinking kind of like guy, right? Sounds like something he would do.
Well,
and obviously was effective.
He's definitely part of the young guy mold. I mean, he kind of fits the same as Matt LaFleur does, and all the other young guys in the league that are coaching right now. And certainly it's a different game. And I think this youth movement in the coaching ranks is showing that. And to have this great of success as a coach in his second year says a lot about him. But I think you also mentioned it too. He definitely has the talent around him. This is the kind of thing that Mike Sherman should have been able to do when he came into Green Bay as a first-time head coach. He had enough talent around him that he should have been more successful, but Sirianni is actually doing it here in Philadelphia.
Well, and that's right. That's what separates the good or great coaches from the average or crappy ones. If you have the talent, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win at all, especially in football. So it's just, you can have the most talented, best players, whatever, and still fuck it up. And we've seen that not only unfortunately, with the Packers, but we've seen it with other teams as well. You're just like, how can they possibly lose? Oh, wait. Yeah. Coaching.
Well, the other thing, though, that you have with Sirianni is that they don't lose games that they should be winning. And, that to me was the
Yes.
most frustrating thing about the Mike Sherman era in Green Bay. And so let's just take a look at Jalen Hurts as far as his statistics for this year. So he missed those 2 games. They lost the 2 games that Jalen Hurts didn't play. He's 16-1 as a starting quarterback this year, including the playoffs. 16-1.
That's pretty good.
That's really good. And yes, their strength of schedule was not so high, although it wasn't really in the end that much different than Kansas City's strength of schedule. But the fact is they didn't lose those games that teams lose all the time. And that says something about a winning mentality, about the things that it takes in order to succeed. Now, the offside of this, though, is that they have been untested in many ways this year. And specifically, when you look at Jalen Hurts has only 4 career wins in games against teams that finished the year with 10 or more victories. And every single one of his 4 wins over 10 plus victory teams comes with an asterisk. 2020, he played against the Saints that had Taysom Hill instead of Drew Brees. This year played the Vikings with Kirk Cousins, Monday Night Football, Kirk Cousins. Played the Cowboys this year with Cooper Rush at quarterback, and played the 49ers this year, who played 3 quarters without a quarterback at all. So he does not have that victory over a good team yet in his resume, though it would be a hell of a way to start out with that resume, making it a Super Bowl victory over Patrick Mahomes.
That would be a signature win, that's for sure.
Yeah, but that's also been the knock against this Eagles team. Even as successful as they've been, of the list of quarterbacks that they've beaten, there's Aaron Rodgers and really nobody else. It hasn't been a murderer's row of quarterbacks out there that have faced the Philadelphia Eagles. So they kind of, I think that was something we've always said this year. The NFC was relatively easy to get through, and that's all you had to do was kind of just be the strongest team to survive. And that's really what Philly did. Philadelphia, to their credit, is pretty healthy as well. And you get to this point in the postseason by being a healthy squad. So with that, we've thrown all those numbers out there, all those things that we believe. We got to put our money where our mouth is. Are you ready to make your Super Bowl prediction on this game?
Sure.
All right.
I'll go first.
Jeff volunteers. All right.
Yeah. All right. Pick me. So I alluded to it a little bit ago. I'm leaning more towards Philadelphia, simply because I think they're a balanced team. Neil, that is interesting. They didn't lose games that they were supposed to win, and that definitely counts for something. Now it's almost a pick'em game. So is this, the Jalen Hurts Sirianni kind of signature win, or is Andy Reid going to come through? Is he going to prove that coaching, he actually still can coach and perhaps out coach a second-year coach in the biggest game there is? I'm thinking that, I'm going to kind of go, I guess, a little Philly underdog here, and I'm going to go with Philly. I think it's going to be a reasonably high-scoring game, probably not as high-scoring as the last time Philly played and won. But John, did you say there was what's the over/under?
51.
51. I'll take the over. Philly win.
I've thought a lot about this game. It's a really tough game to pick, and in the end, the thing that really excites me about Philadelphia as a team is that balance. The fact that they can get you in so many ways. They've got the better wide receivers. Jalen Hurts can hurt you in a lot of ways, and Jalen Hurts is impressed as a quarterback when he's had to throw. A lot of times he just hasn't had to throw. They have that chip on their shoulder, Jeff. I think you're right. But in the end, Patrick Mahomes is a better quarterback. And despite my great fears of Andy Reid reading the game, as he's done so many times, Patrick Mahomes is just better. And I think Patrick Mahomes being better is going to be enough for Kansas City to win this game. And the other thing related to Andy Reid, he's had 2 weeks to prepare. And this is what Andy Reid is good at, is preparation. So I think that he's going to have a game plan where he's going to have a lot of little twists that he can throw in at different times, just as he did when they won the Super Bowl a few years ago. I think he's going to have those certain plays that are going to get the job done and push them over the line, despite not running the ball as much as he should. So I'm picking Kansas City, and I think that Patrick Mahomes gets Super Bowl number 2.
All right. And what do you like for total points in the game, Neil? Over 51 or under?
I think if it's over, Kansas City is going to win. If it's under, Philadelphia is going to win. So I'm picking the over.
All right. So I guess I'm the tiebreaker here between the two of us, and I agree that the X factor here is the quarterback position and the quarterback play. And Patrick Mahomes, with the experience and the eye test, I think he's just going to be the overall better player. Hopefully we don't get Andy Reid in a clock management situation, but I think that it will be close throughout the game. There will be times where Philadelphia is going to look strong. That defense is going to be strong, but with the points on this one, like I said, if you go to the window and your guy is going to give you the 1.5 points or 2.5 points, you may want him, you may like him, but I don't think you're going to need him. I think that it's going to be Kansas City taking this one, even with the points, and I will go over the 51 as well. Now, we don't have a bunch of prop bets picked out. We talked about this last year, prop bets, but let's just do a simple one. Heads or tails on the opening coin toss. Jeff, you like heads or tails?
Tails.
I always like tails.
Tails. All right, I'll take heads then. All right, we'll see how that pick works out for us when we come back next week. Unless there's a different prop bet you guys saw out there. You want to throw anything out? Length of the national anthem, wardrobe malfunction at halftime.
I'm hoping for that one. So
Jeff is hoping for a wardrobe malfunction at halftime.
One never knows. I think they're still. I think they've always been a delay since then as well.
Right. All right, so those are our picks. We'll be back next week to take a look at them. But as we talked about, one of the big factors in this game, it actually relates to our Packer of the past.
So our Packer of the past is former Packers assistant coach Andy Reid, obviously having coached for Philadelphia and now Kansas City. So Andy Reid and I share a birthday. He was born 12 years before me in 1958. And Andy Reid's first show to prominence was on Monday Night Football at age 13 in 1971 in the punt, pass, and kick competition. He was already 6'1", 210 at age 13. He went on and played high school football, was an offensive lineman, went to college at BYU. And when he got to college, he had some injuries and didn't play a ton at college, but he certainly played with some really great players and met some really great people at Brigham Young University. He was a teammate of Jim McMahon. He was a teammate of Steve Young. But when he finished college as a player, had been always paying attention to all of the different things that the coaches were doing. And so the BYU head coach, Lavelle Edwards, said, hey, why don't you just stay on and coach with me? And so he was a coach as a graduate assistant at BYU starting in 1982. Notably, also coaching at that time there as the quarterback coach was Mike Holmgren, who was quarterback coach at BYU from 82 until 85. Steve Young was a prominent quarterback in that time and was second in the Heisman Trophy voting in the following year. After 1 year at BYU, Andy Reid went to be offensive line coach in a number of different places. 3 years at San Francisco State, 1 year at Northern Arizona, 2 years at UTEP, and 3 years at Missouri, but never rising above the level of an offensive line coach. And so it was somewhat strange when he was hired onto Mike Holmgren's first staff. Obviously, that connection from back in the day meant something because usually you don't go from no higher than offensive line coach at a mid-tier D1 program directly into pro coaching. But obviously Mike Holmgren saw something with Andy Reid at that time. So 1992, Andy Reid goes to Green Bay, starting as the assistant offensive line coach. In 1995, he was promoted to, in addition, be the tight ends coach for the Packers. And with 1996, obviously the Packers won the Super Bowl. John mentioned they won the Super Bowl as an assistant coach for the Packers. After that 96 season, Steve Mariucci took Marty Mornhinweg away. And so he was promoted to the quarterbacks coach for the Packers in 97 and served as a quarterbacks coach and assistant head coach for the Packers in 97 and 98. Also serving as a quarterback for the Packers at that time, future Andy Reid assistant Doug Peterson. Now, when Brett Favre heard about the Packers promoting Andy Reid to quarterbacks coach, his initial reaction was a little bit of fear. And specifically, Andy Reid was as the tight ends coach, would keep the players in meetings exceptionally long times. Brett Favre complained that everyone else would leave the facility and the tight ends would still be in their meetings. And specifically, Brett Favre stated, "I love Andy, but he is going to meeting us to death." He eventually got over that. Andy Reid sort of recognized that Brett Favre and long meetings are not things that go well together. And Andy Reid is credited by Brett Favre for teaching him a lot of things as far as reading defense and specifically learning about how there's certain players that would tip plays and looking at those inexperienced players and how they would tip the play that the defense was going to run, giving Brett Favre a heads up on the defense. And so Favre credits Andy Reid for a lot. He's spoken very highly of Andy Reid many times over the years. And the story changes in 1998. So 1998 season, John wants to mention the last game of Mike Holmgren. Jerry Rice didn't catch it. And after that loss in the divisional round to the San Francisco 49ers, Mike Holmgren was ready to move on. He wanted to have power. Ron Wolf was not going to cede power. And so on the 3rd of January, 1999, we lost in the division round. 5 days later, the 8th of January, 99, Mike Holmgren signed with the Seattle Seahawks with full control. And he had been looking at several teams, including the Philadelphia Eagles. So we have this period where it's unknown as far as who is going to be that next coach for the Packers. And as it turns out, Ron Wolf had one person in mind. There was only one person Ron Wolf interviewed. That was Ray Rhodes. Now, Ray Rhodes had coached for Philadelphia for 4 years, but his final year, the Eagles were only 3-13 on the season, and he had a losing record over his 4 years in Philadelphia. Ron Wolf's rationale is that the Packers were sort of tired of all of the strictness and all of the rules of Mike Holmgren, and they needed to have somebody who was a little bit different, somebody who was going to be an enforcer, somebody who's going to be focused on discipline. And that's what Ray Rhodes was known for. Now, Mike Holmgren also had been going to talk to Philadelphia for that head coaching job. And when he decided to go to Seattle, he told the Philadelphia ownership that they should be looking at Andy Reid. And the Philadelphia ownership specifically said that they wanted to have somebody who was exceptionally detail-oriented. Specifically, their ownership asked for people who were excessively detail-oriented coaches that players complained about. Andy Reid was apparently at that level of attention to detail. The Eagles wanted attention to detail, and that is what they got with Andy Reid. And certainly the Packers going with Ray Rhodes versus going with Andy Reid is one of the great what ifs in Packers history. It should be noted that Andy Reid was the second youngest head coach at that time, and he was the first to be hired as a head coach without ever serving as an offensive coordinator or as a defensive coordinator. So there was certainly risk by Philadelphia in making that call, but he had been assistant head coach for 2 years. Andy Reid within Philadelphia, 14 years and incredible record, 10-9 in the playoffs with Philadelphia, 4 straight NFC championship games, went to the Super Bowl in 2004 and lost to New England in Super Bowl 39, finished Philadelphia in 2012 with a disappointing season, went immediately to Kansas City, 117-45, 11-7 in the playoffs with Kansas City, including currently 5 straight AFC championship games. One of the roles that Andy Reid has had in Kansas City, however, has been serving as functional GM for the last several years. And he was specifically central in the Kansas City Chiefs picking Patrick Mahomes as their quarterback with the 10th pick in the draft. And specifically, Andy Reid saw in Patrick Mahomes a younger version of Brett Favre. He saw that gunslinger mentality. He saw somebody who was going to see things and take advantage of those opportunities. And obviously that has worked out extremely well. Andy Reid's role as a quarterback whisperer is something that is well known. So Andy Reid in Philadelphia, just a couple of quick notes about Andy in Philadelphia. 99, he signed Doug Peterson away from the Packers as a free agent. He had 2 notable playoff games against the Packers. 2003, that 4th and 26 debacle in which we only scored 3 points after the first quarter. But the other one is a much happier game, the 2010 wild card game in which the Packers won 21-16 on the way to Super Bowl 45. One note, though, about Andy Reid, and I'm going to finish with something that's maybe not quite as positive, and that is he plays the way that he wants to play. This pass-happy approach is something that has been his signature throughout his career. And if you look at Andy Reid's playoff losses, they always come with an exceptional imbalance between the passing and the running game. His first playoff loss, 2000, Donovan McNabb, 20 for 41, 6 sacks for 41 yards, 140 net yards passing on 47 passing attempts. Only 9 rushes by non-quarterbacks in that first loss. In the 2004, I'm not going through every game, but in the 2004 Super Bowl, Donovan McNabb, 51 attempts, 4 sacks. So 55-16 ratio in that Super Bowl loss. 2008 NFC Championship game against Arizona, Donovan McNabb had, again, 49 different dropbacks versus 16 runs. And the running game was not unsuccessful. It's just that's the way it worked. 43-10 in their 2009 loss to Dallas in the playoffs. And then in that 2010 NFC playoff game loss, which was Andy Reid's last playoff game in Philadelphia. The Packers had a 29-29 ratio of rushes to passes. Andy Reid's Philadelphia Eagles with Michael Vick, 39-13 passes to rushes by non-running backs. And that exact same pattern follows in his losses against other teams in Kansas City. Going back to 2021, that's actually one of his most balanced games, but it was still a 43-21 ratio last year. In Super Bowl 55 that they lost to the Buccaneers, 49 passes for Mahomes plus 3 sacks, only 12 rushes. 2018 championship game, only 10 rushes. 2017, they only had 15 rushes. 2016, when you're at Alex Smith, still only 12 rushes in that loss. So Andy Reid's bugaboo has always been forgetting to run the ball. And we're hoping that that is not what happens. We're hoping he has people that are going to remind him that that's an opening against Philadelphia. I am hoping for Andy Reid on Sunday. Let's see Andy Reid win his second Super Bowl as a head coach.
That's kind of a tale as old as we are in Green Bay, forgetting to run the football, and Andy being a product of Green Bay, the Holmgren coaching tree. I can see where that comes into play. And Neil, yes, my dying words will be Jerry Rice fumbled. And with that, Neil, we have talked a lot about Kansas City and Andy Reid in particular, but there's a big connection with Andy Reid. So we want to go to Philadelphia next. So that means we're going to bring in our guest here. His name is Ryan. He is representing the Philadelphia Eagles this week. He is primarily a fantasy football blogger and YouTuber, so he knows his way all around the NFL, but we're going to pick his brain on the Eagles here today. Where do you find him on game day? He's at Xfinity Live, and he tells us the biggest thing he's looking forward to this year is another parade. So Ryan, welcome to the program. We'll get that one out of the way.
That's lofty. Another parade's lofty. It's a lofty.
Yeah, 5 years ago. What was it like?
Oh my goodness. So I had a firefighter like escort down there because like I know some people. Well, my dad knows some people. So I got a little special escort down to like the parade route. And oh my gosh, it was hectic. It was everything you could imagine Philadelphia be like. When you see these videos, it's exactly like that, but like times 100. Like there's just people dancing in the streets. There's speakers everywhere. It was absolutely insane. I want to go back so bad. It was an electric atmosphere, and I miss it.
Talk about that atmosphere, though. What is it like in Philadelphia or your section of Pennsylvania in general? How are people feeling?
Oh, I mean, we're feeling great. I mean, the buzz is fantastic. It's just been awesome. Everyone's, a little more upbeat when the Eagles are doing good around this area. And when they're not, Philadelphia is going to go down one way or another.
Related to that, though, I've noticed a change among my friends who are Eagles fans, that there always seem to be, when is the other shoe going to drop? There's this incredible optimism and love of the team. Philadelphia fans are undoubtedly passionate, but there always seemed to be a fatalism before that Super Bowl victory. And they don't seem to have that same fatalism now. There's more of an expectation that you have among teams that are perpetually good. Do you sense that among your friends and fellow Eagles fans?
Yes, among my friends that are Eagles fans. I totally agree with that because I'll be the first one to say it. I wanted Howie Roseman gone like a couple of years ago before the Super Bowl, of course. He proved me wrong. I tend to agree. I mean, perpetually good teams seem to always be good. And, the Eagles seem to fit into that category now when they didn't a couple of years ago. Even with Andy Reid. I know we're going to talk about Andy Reid a little bit, but
well, go ahead.
The Chip Kelly years were dark, man. They were dark.
Well, Andy certainly, made his mark in Philadelphia in his time there. He did bring you to the Super Bowl and then summarily left town. And since being in Kansas City has had probably even bigger success in Kansas City. How do Philadelphians look at that? What are they? Do they look back at Andy fondly? Are they still secretly cheering for him, or do they want to just trounce on him with no mercy?
We're rooting for him, but like, you want to trounce on him here? But it's not like a personal thing. Like, it was time for the Eagles and Andy Reid to separate. It was time for him to go with everything going on. We needed a new head coach, and I'm glad he found success in Kansas City, and he drafted basically the best quarterback, at least of my era growing up. Him with Patrick Mahomes, he's got something special. I heard there's rumors he might retire if he wins. So
Mahomes or Reid?
Reid, no. Mahomes ain't going anywhere. We're stuck with him forever.
Too, yeah. Jeff, you're in that Andy Reid retire.
Yeah, I'm thinking so. Go out on top.
I mean, what's there left to prove? He's going out on top against his former team that he coached forever.
Yeah.
That's like the storybook ending. Like,
Right. He'll ride off into the sunset. He'll be in the Hall of Fame. And yeah, his last victory will be against his former team.
You come into things like with a fantasy football perspective. So you're kind of league wide. You look at a lot of players that way. When you compare these two teams, if you had to pick, your four positions or your four best, are you picking primarily Eagles or are you picking primarily Chiefs?
that's a really tough question because they get the edge at both spots. Like the Chiefs had no production from wide receivers this year, really. Like Juju a little bit, MVS in the playoffs, he actually really performed well. But like Travis Kelce is like a cheat code in fantasy football because he just is better than everyone else by like miles. And like quarterback's the only spot that are even. Like Jalen Hurts with his rushing ability scores a ton, and Patrick Mahomes he's just magic. Like I don't know what to say. Like I've run out of adjectives to describe that man. You want me to pick four players from a combined two teams? You're making me think a lot. I'll take the two easy ones. I'll take the layups right away with AJ Brown and Travis Kelce because they're the two best offensive weapons on their respective teams. And I mean, Travis Kelce was a steal back in the draft, and then AJ Brown. I couldn't believe that on draft day. I still have my live reaction somewhere on YouTube. I couldn't believe that we got him in a trade for the 18th pick, and then we obviously paid him the bag, but he's been worth that and all more. And I'll have to say Miles Sanders. Isaiah Pacheco he's been impressive for his draft capital out of Rutgers, but Miles Sanders just had a career year behind that line. And if we're cheating and picking offensive lines too, I'll take the Eagles. And then give me Mahomes. Why not? I'll go even down the board.
All right. What about kicker? Let's get an X factor in there. Who's the better kicker?
How many fantasy football games I've lost because of kickers is I've been trying to get them out of my home league for years now. No dice.
No.
I always get outvoted like 8-2, 7-3. I got one or two of my friends with me, but like I want to say Jake Elliott with Harrison Butker's struggles. He's been struggling a little bit. Not Brett Maher level struggles, but he's been
few, if any, have struggled that much.
Oh my gosh.
So you can't get rid of kickers because you have old guys like me who back when they were in college and fantasy football was just straight scoring and they had Chip Lohmiller on their team to win themselves a championship with. they hold on to those kickers, Ryan.
You should see the people that draft Justin Tucker.
Yeah.
feels like the same thing.
Yeah.
What about defense now? Do you get into defense, fantasy defense? Do you just do defense as a whole, or do you get into defensive positions?
I've dove in a little of both. I mean, defensive positions is hard. I just do the defenses and I try to get rid of those where I could too, because I just don't like it. I feel like it takes a little bit of the skill of the game and it adds a lot of luck because you never know which defense is going to have a pick six that week. Like, come on.
Well, if you had to pick a guy who's going to have a pick six this week, who do you think it would be?
It's got to be I got to be biased. I got to be a homer. I got to say Darius Slay.
There you go.
Like, come on.
That's what I wanted you to say.
he had one of the best performances I've seen this season against Justin Jefferson. I forgot what week it was, but on Monday Night Football, he absolutely just clamped him. And I hope he could do that to whoever he needs to. Probably Juju, I would assume, because I assume Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is going to be on Travis Kelce with some help. I hope.
Yeah.
They leave him one-on-one. It's going to be a long night for me.
Any chance of any special teams production? Anybody going to score on a return at all?
No, but now that I say that, probably will. Boston's got my house one and just, send my house into an eruption.
Has there been anything about the Philadelphia special teams this year that has given you thoughts that maybe they might break out with a touchdown at some random point or a block kick or something like that? I mean, have they shown sparks or have they just been generally competent without being extraordinary?
I remember back in the early 2010s when we had Darren Sproles and like he was electric. We don't have that anymore. Our special teams have gotten progressively worse as time's gone on. So like I'm just hoping for anything on special teams.
You're sounding a lot like Packers fans over the last few years.
Well,
just don't drop the ball.
Yeah.
Compare this team to what Philadelphia had 5 years ago. We talked a lot about that. It was a big moment for you going to the Super Bowl, winning, getting the parade. But look at that team 5 years ago and where they are now, because there's quite a bit. There's a lot of turnover. Even.
Yeah, I believe there's only like 3 or 4 guys left, like Brandon Graham, Lane Johnson, Kelce, and Fletcher Cox. I feel like everyone else might be different at this point. Yeah, how he turns it out. But so that team just had a special feeling to it. Like I don't feel that now, but I feel like it's like a juggernaut team. Like we're just better. Like, you know, like we had a backup quarterback back then. Now Jalen Hurts is not injured like Carson Wentz was. Thank goodness. That was a whole debacle. But he almost won an MVP. He might have if he didn't get hurt, which feels like Carson Wentz from 5 years ago. So there's shades of similarity there. But I just feel like this team is better than the team of old. But like that team will always have a special place in my heart because Nick Foles came in and just outdueled Tom Brady. And, you know, I'd be pretty happy to say the Eagles' 2 Super Bowl wins came against arguably 2 of the best quarterbacks we've seen in the past how many years?
When you talk about the talent on that Philadelphia team, could anybody have coached this team, or is there something special about Nick Sirianni that he's brought in?
I know Julian Love has brought this one up, and I forget what show it was on, but he said Nick Sirianni got a free ride. I read somewhere that Nick Sirianni had the highest wins above replacement for like coach, like just decision making. So maybe he's got a good guy in his ear, or he's just a really good coach and we're just discounting him because the roster is that good. So I don't want to say anyone could have coached this team, but like there was no one better suited than him with his attitude. I know a lot of people hate him. Obviously, I'm not one of them being from there, but I know from the outside it could be different. But I'm a big fan of what he's doing, and like I can admit right here, I was wrong. That press conference had me doubting him. This time in Indy had me doubting him, and he's just blown past all my expectations. Jalen Hurts too. I was wrong, and like I said, I'm happy to be wrong.
You sound like Neil, because Neil initially was coming into this season not a big Jalen Hurts fan.
Let me just say this. Going into the season, I was really excited about everything the Eagles did. And I thought the thing that was going to hold them back was Jalen Hurts. And I was just straight out wrong as far as that's concerned. I love what they did as far as their line, their offensive line and defensive line, just incredibly strong units. Trading for AJ Brown obviously was incredible. And the question is, was Jalen Hurts going to be able to get the job done? I didn't think so. He clearly can get the job done. He's an amazing quarterback. He does an amazing job moving the ball, both with his legs and with his arm. And he's been a real, I can't say joy to watch because I'm an anti-Eagles person, but it's been really exciting as a football fan to watch his development.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right there. Like, we obviously all knew he had it as a rusher because he showed it last year, but he didn't show it with the arm. And he made significant strides throughout the offseason, which obviously getting a number 1 wide receiver in AJ Brown helped. And I feel like that's the blueprint multiple teams should follow. Good coaching and a productive number 1 wide receiver. I know I'm going to talk interdivision here, but the Bears need to do something for Justin Fields. And that's all I'm going to say.
Well, we don't want them to do something.
You don't want them to do
we're
that.
very
But
concerned about the Bears actually becoming good. And the Bears being the Bears is just sort of kind of a perfect situation for us.
He has to take a leap that Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts did. And that's like, I don't bank on that as an outside viewer. So like, we'll see.
I think there'd have to be other factors come in to help Justin Fields out. I think it's not the same. I just don't think he's that good of a quarterback as, you know, we could be looking at, you know, with Jalen Hurts, you know, I mean, look what Patrick Mahomes did early in his career is, you know, kind of the heir apparent perhaps or something in the NFC to Patrick Mahomes. It's too early to tell, but certainly he's as Neil pointed out earlier when we were talking 16-1 this year. So, you know, that's not too bad as a NFL starting quarterback. So
yeah, but he gets a lot of, you know, I don't know what to say here. He gets a lot of hate for just winning because the team was just so much better than everyone else's team. Like the Eagles got discredited.
Wasn't great this year.
It wasn't great, but like, how is that the Eagles' problem? Like, you know,
right?
Ryan,
I hate
to tell you, Eagles players don't get hate because they're good. They get hate because they're Eagles players. Okay.
I know. I've just become used to it. And I just, you know, like I've been seeing all the talk about the San Fran game and like how they think it was stolen, how they would have been better with Brock Purdy. Obviously they would have been better with Brock Purdy, but like, I just hear all the noise out there. I'm like, dang, that stinks. You know, you could have signed a third quarterback. I know most teams don't do that, but like you had all season.
As Packer fans, we were definitely not brokenhearted to see San Francisco lose like that.
Yeah, it was probably delightful for you guys.
Yeah.
It's
It wa-
tough for me with the Eagles winning, but I've lived in the Philly metro area for a long time now, and I've
You
been
always get a good party out of
I've
it.
seen a lot of pain at Lincoln Financial Field in my life as a Packers fan, but I've got a lot of friends who are Eagles fans too. So
Like I said, you'll get a good party out of it at least with some friends. Like could be worse.
That's true. That's true. But it was interesting. I thought it was when you said earlier though about kind of the culture of winning. So, before when the Super Bowl, it was kind of like waiting for the shootout, the other shoe to drop, kind of the glass half empty kind of thing. Like what are they going to do to screw this up, right? How are they going to find a way to lose? So this year, and kind of last year too, but certainly this year, they didn't lose the games. They didn't lose hardly any games, but I mean, they didn't play down to their competition. And we talked about this earlier too, that they won games that they were supposed to win, right? And that is a winning coaching players. That's a winning culture, not playing down your competition. That's going to be interesting to see what this team, not only for the Super Bowl, but if there's a Super Bowl hangover or not, or if this is really going to be, if they're going to be dominant now going forward for years to come.
I mean, I feel like the Super Bowl hangover thing's been kind of broken. The Rams are a different scenario because they just
the Rams might disagree with you.
that feels different though. That wasn't the Rams. That's not the same team that we saw last year. The Bengals almost made it back. So yeah, I don't think it's much of a problem. And the NFC is so weak, and I don't even know if there's going to be any added quarterbacks in the draft of the NFC. It looks like the AFC is positioned to draft all the good guys this year. So we'll see.
So taking a look at Sunday, we'll want to find out what your plan is, but let's get the good stuff out of the way. I already have you penciled in as picking Philly for the win. So we're looking at the over.
You're right. You're definitely right. How can I pick against my team?
The over under is 51 points combined between the two teams. Do you think that they will combine to score more than 51 points or less than?
Look, life's too short to bet the under. I know it's a Barstool quote, but I use it like I sit there. I'm like, man, what a defensive stop. No, I want the offense to score as many points as they can, and I think this is smashing the over. I mean, the only way it doesn't is if Hassan Reddick gets going. Which, by the way, you're speaking of gambling here. I'm betting him as Super Bowl MVP at 35-1. I love those odds. I feel like he'd be a game breaker. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's a long shot, and I love it.
The only prop bet we're taking is the coin toss, heads or tails. What do you like?
Oh gosh, I'm so corny because tails never fails, and it always seems to fail when I call it. So I don't bet on coin tosses.
All right, but you're going tails.
Yeah.
All right, so tails, Philly to win, taking the over. So what are you going to be doing on Sunday? Where are you going to be?
So I'm going to be right at home. I'm not going to be down in the city, unfortunately, because my family gets together, like my immediate family, cousins, whatnot. We get together, we have a Super Bowl party. I'm trying to remember when the first one was. I believe the first one was when the Giants beat the Patriots in that immaculate season kind of thing. And that's forever ago at this point. We've just been, getting together ever since. So Eagles are not
you throw a party no matter who's in. So this is extra special with the Eagles in there.
Yeah, it was special last time. It was a lot of yelling. There's usually not a lot of yelling at these parties, but when the Eagles are in there, there's a ton of yelling. I'm yelling at the TV.
Well, Ryan, tell us about yourself. Where can people find you online? What are you doing?
I'm starting to get back in the swing of things with fantasy football content. Rookie season's coming up, obviously, as everyone knows, the draft's getting here, and that means for Dynasty football, it never stops. It keeps on rolling. So rookie drafts are coming up, and you can find me at RyanPros_FF, and I'm trying to get into graphics, trying to dabble in graphic design, but we'll see how that goes. But yeah, you can find me there, and I'll be tweeting out some things. I appreciate you guys for having me on. It was such a fun time to talk birds. I love talking Eagles. I have a Lions fan in my group chat. Come on, man.
Ooh.
Wow.
I just feel bad for him at this point.
Yeah, maybe be a little better next year, but
they should be. I feel like they would have been third or fourth best in the NFC if they would have gotten in, because all these other teams felt kind of fake, if you're asking me.
In addition to your Twitter presence, you're also on YouTube as well. What are you doing over there?
Yeah, I guest star on my buddy's YouTube, Tyler FF Creator. He creates content for Dynasty League Football. He does articles for them, and he was recently doing live shows. So yeah, I guessed on there. We talk Dynasty. We do a question answer format where the chat just asks us questions about trades. Where do you think who's going? Stuff like that. And we just answer. We spitball and have a good time. It's a chill, relaxed environment. So
We'll talk about your analysis, like when you get into players and fantasy. Look just at this last season. What's maybe the best advice you gave on a sleeper, and what's the worst advice you gave on someone coming up?
I've made a lot of bad draft picks in my days. Like, I don't know if you remember the Jeremy Hill days in Cincinnati. I picked that man in the first round years ago. So like, I've come a long way because he was bad.
Okay.
Brees Hall was my most exposed player, and like, the underdog does like the best ball tournaments and whatnot. He was my most exposed player, and it was going very well. And like, he was my all-in ship shove, and then he tore his ACL. So like, I'm still gonna count it because he was gonna be maybe RB1 in the fantasy season before then, and it just didn't turn out the way we hoped. So maybe next year.
Well, we will make sure that we check you out. We encourage other people, if you get into fantasy football, find Ryan online. And good luck this weekend. You want to give us a big Fly Eagles fly before you go?
Yeah, Fly Eagles fly. I there we go. There we go. Fly Eagles fly. Got to change it to green.
Awesome. It looks great.
Nice. Well done, Ryan. Well done.
All right, Ryan, thanks for joining us from Philadelphia. He's rooting for the Eagles this weekend.
Go Birds.
And last week, we did a history report where we talked about the Kansas City Chiefs and the Super Bowl. As you can tell, this is our Eagles show. So to tell us about the Philadelphia Eagles and the Super Bowl with our bedtime story, Jeff, take it away.
All right. So Philly and the Super Bowl, and also because Philly is a much older team, they've got a number of world championships pre-Super Bowl as well. So let's start, let's kind of go from present day backwards. So Super Bowl 57 is this Sunday. Philadelphia is in it. Kansas City's in it. Who's going to win? TBD. So Philadelphia comes in as the number 1 seed, 14-3 overall in the regular season. And currently, we'll see what happens. So Super Bowl 52, we've referred to this, and Ryan talked about it as well. So that was the first win in the Super Bowl era by Philadelphia. They beat New England 41-33. Again, Super Bowl 52 on February 4th, 2018. Right down the road for me here. That was at US Bank Stadium in Minneapolis.
So Super Bowl 52 having the Philly special as the really, truly remarkable play. Trey Burton to Nick Foles on a touchdown. Big Dick with 3 touchdown passes and 1 touchdown reception. Really, one of the most remarkable stories in a Super Bowl.
So then we go the first 2 Super Bowls that Philadelphia was in, then they lost. So Super Bowl 39, and we referred to this as well in this show. Super Bowl 39, where Philly lost to New England 24-21 on February 6th, 2005. That was in Jacksonville, Florida. And I remember reading that what a horrible venue that was, Jacksonville, for a Super Bowl. Florida, yes, technically, but everything else was a disaster. So then, big gap going back to Super Bowl 15 for Philadelphia, where Philly lost. The Dick Vermeil-led Philadelphia Eagles lost to the Oakland Raiders 27-10. That was January 25th, 1981. That was in New Orleans.
A couple of things about that Super Bowl. I was still on the edge of being a Raiders fan at that point. Jim Plunkett with one of the more incredible stat lines in that game, with 13 of 21 for 260 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Ron Jaworski is a legend in Philadelphia. You can see Jaworski jerseys whenever you go to games in Philadelphia. In that game, he was 18 of 38 for 291 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, and a fumble. So 4 turnovers for Jaworski in that game. He is still a Philadelphia Eagles legend.
That's right. And Plunkett was the MVP, as I recall, that game as well. So those are the 4 Super Bowls that Philadelphia, Sundays, and the other 3 that they appeared in. So Philadelphia, though, also because they do have historic roots as well. So they also appeared in 4 pre-merger NFL championship games as well, and their record in those is pretty good. They're 3 wins, only 1 loss. So the only loss was in their first appearance in an NFL championship game in 1947, where they lost to the Chicago Cardinals 28-21. They were back to back to back. So they won the next two. And I know he was going to talk about these a little bit. So in 1948 and 1949, they won NFL championships. In 1948, they beat the Chicago Cardinals this time 7-0. And then in 1949, they beat the LA Rams 14-0. Neil?
We should be very happy that quarterback play has evolved in the National Football League, because while I haven't done complete analysis, 1948 has to be the absolute worst quarterbacking ever in any NFL championship game in history. So it was a 7-0 victory for the Eagles. The Cardinals quarterback went 3 of 11 for 0 touchdowns and 1 interception. Somehow the Eagles quarterback was worth. Tommy Thompson was the quarterback for that 1948 Eagles victorious team. He was 2 of 12 for 7 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. The two quarterbacks combined 5 of 23, 42 yards, 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions.
Wow.
So the 1949 game was a much more dominant game as far as the Eagles were concerned. As Jeff said, 14-0 over the Rams. And the rushing yards tell the story of that game. The Eagles had 274 rushing yards. The Rams had 21 rushing yards in the game. So I think that one you can call superior offense and superior defense for that 49 Eagles team.
Well, we'll see if there's a repeat this Sunday. So the final pre-merger championship game, we have a picture of that here, where the Philadelphia Eagles played the Green Bay Packers. This was the 1960 season. This was played at Franklin Field in Philadelphia, and this was the Eagles' last pre-merger championship. It was a 17-13 win over the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, and we've talked about that game, how the Lombardi Packers were dominant, and it's probably because they were dominant and lost that spurred them on to the 5 titles in the next 7 years. But the Packers out first down Philadelphia 22-13. They outrushed Philadelphia 223-99. Total yards over 400 for the Packers, under 300 for Philadelphia. And the Packers only had 1 turnover to 3 for Philadelphia. There's, by every statistic, every metric for that game, the Packers were the better team, other than the one metric that matters. That 1960 championship game at Franklin Field, a stadium that's an historic stadium. I've actually engaged in track events at Franklin Field. If you're in Philadelphia, it's on the Penn campus. It's a great place to visit, and a slice of history as far as Philadelphia and the National Football League is concerned.
Yep, and presumably kind of the fire that Lombardi used to spur his team to not lose another championship.
So there's one other championship for Philadelphia in the National Football League, and this goes back to the roots of Philadelphia. So the Philadelphia Eagles didn't start in the NFL until 1933, but before that, the NFL team was the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, Frankfurt being the terminus of the Frankfurt line in Philadelphia. They were in the NFL from 1924 to 31, and they were the champions in 1926 with a 14-1-2 record. They were also second in the NFL in 1928 to the Providence Steamrollers, which is a great name. And the only reason the Eagles became a franchise is because the city of Philadelphia lost the franchise of the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets under exceptionally unfortunate circumstances in 1931. So in 1931, there was a fire in the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets home stadium. And because of that fire, they couldn't play any home games. They had to play games spread out all throughout the region. They got basically no attendance at those games. And the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets folded at the end of that 1931 season as a result of their financial difficulties. And essentially, the Eagles franchise was given to them in 1933 because there was no franchise in Philadelphia at that time. One other note as far as those 1931 Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, they beat the Bears in Wrigley Field in 1931. After that 1931 victory in Wrigley Field, Philadelphia did not win another game in Chicago until 1999, a 68-year stretch without a road victory in Chicago. And the Packers actually had a streak that was almost as good as that with the Philadelphia sports franchises. So the Yellow Jackets won in Green Bay in 1928, and no Philadelphia team won in Green Bay then until 1979. So 51 years without a road victory in Wisconsin for Philadelphia football sports teams.
Wow. It sounds like just Philadelphia didn't like coming to the Midwest, right? Going to Chicago or Green Bay. Not a lot of success because there were some pretty lean teams in there. But, I guess that's a very esoteric stat, Neil. Way to go. That's digging deep. That's really getting into the weeds. So well done.
Hey, that's what we are about, digging deep with the history and getting some good trivia out there on the Packers and the NFL. So we've got the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs this weekend in Super Bowl 57. We've made our picks. All we have to do now is wait and watch the game. We'll revisit next week on our picks. Hopefully everybody has a good Super Bowl Sunday wherever you choose to gather for your games. Any final thoughts from the two of you?
I want barbecue over cheesesteak this weekend.
All right.
And we'll see if we can get Fly Eagles Fly.
Fly Eagles Fly versus how about those Chiefs?
Oh, Chiefs.
All right, we'll see what happens. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit subscribe. It's free. Leave us a comment as well. You can find the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat. That's all one word on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat. And we are on Facebook at the GBC podcast, Green Bay Chat. And as always, may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.